Wait, wait, back, huh? Just want freedom, baby, freedom, baby. I'm singing all the same. It's a love to be with I sing. You did good. You did that. What are you doing now? Don't worry, just stay lazy. No. What is this one? Tropical level. The medals are deceived. Disease. Let's see. You can't kill the party. You get the powers of you really want to do it. The family was convinced that any possibility of self-harm was part of the distant past. But that changed on March 18th, shortly before Margaret and Scott's baby was due. Scott Kirk was taking a bath and saw his wife walk past the door a couple of times. He said he had her in a bathtub about 5 minutes later, and he observed that his wife had somehow tied a rope from the banister on the second floor and had hung herself. Margaret died a short time later and to compound an already unimaginable tragedy, the baby did not survive. But the first thought was, why would she do this close? She's within like 2 weeks of having the baby, so it really didn't make a whole lot of sense. Everyone was shocked. What happened seemed so impulsive, especially with the baby on the way. Even first responders and Akron police were suspicious. The detectives really thought there was more to it. The EMTs thought there was more to it. No one had answers. Not Scott, not the family, not Margaret's friends. It was left to the coroner to decide what had happened. And the fact that Margaret had attempted suicide years earlier played into his ruling.
With all the information that the coroner was given, he looked at everything in totality and decided, I'm going to rule it a suicide.
Ultimately, the coroner ruled that it was a suicide, and the police were really, kind of forced at that point to just stay with that. Margaret's family mourned, but refused to believe she killed herself.
We call once a year just to see if there's any way they could reopen it, and unfortunately, with that ruling, the case was closed, and they weren't allowed to do anything about it.
In the years after Margaret's death, there was another series of crimes that seemingly had nothing to do with her, until police decided to take a closer look at who was committing those crimes and why.
They're inseparable. These are besties. It's a very thin line between love and hate. Whatever happened here was horrific.
Vengeance, killer besties, now available on demand. After his wife's suicide in 1985, Scott Kirk moved on with his life. But tragedy seemed to follow him. In March of 2009, police were called to a fire at the house that Scott shared with him.
When we first pulled up, the house was absolutely destroyed. It was gone. It was unsavable.
Luckily, Scott Kirk and his family
That's when he discovered the fire. He alerted everyone, and they were able to get the kids out of the house.
Veteran arson investigators soon realized why the house went up so fast.
There was a trail of gas that was poured. You could see the pour pattern on the grass leading all the way to the house and around the foundation.
Since Detective Ken Mifflin assumed he was dealing with an arson fire, he asked Scott Kirk the obvious question: was there anyone who would want to harm him or his family? And Scott immediately volunteered a possibility.
Scott and his wife had an open relationship. They were swingers and had an interesting lifestyle. They both had their own girlfriends and boyfriends and so forth.
Was it possible a boyfriend or a girlfriend from outside the marriage had attacked the family?
It was open the door to the possibilities that there were other people that could be involved with this situation.
As police explored this possibility, they also did a standard background check on Scott Kirk, and that turned up more than a few surprises. Scott was an ex-convict with an infamous reputation. He was known by local media as the Ninja Burglar. He was arrested for committing at least 10 different burglaries or breaking into cars and homes and businesses. And he was pretending to be a ninja.
He would dress up in dark clothing and then break into women's homes. He would take their underwear typically as his trophies, I guess, for lack of a better term.
This string of burglaries, for which Scott served over an unusual exchange he had with Scott the night of the fire.
Scott and I are having this conversation about his house literally burning down right in front of us. And Scott says to me, just out of the blue, that he was married back in the early 80s, and his wife, his first wife, who was 9 months pregnant, had hung herself. So he just brought that up out of the blue. No reason for the conversation. I had no idea, nothing. I didn't even know Scott prior to first coming to the scene.
Detective Mifflin, a seasoned veteran with decades of investigative experience, later said this was one of the strangest moments of his career. So strange that he decided to look back into Scott Burke's past. And what he found unearthed secrets that were literally buried with the dead.
This is the story that people are talking about all over the country. No one has seen a videotape like this before. When I watched the video, I had no doubt that she was abducted.
Lies, crimes, and video now available on demand.
Detectives investigating the 2009 fire that burned Scott Burke's home to the ground found that wasn't his first brush with a nearly fatal fire. Back in 1980, the home he lived in also caught fire.
If something in your life happens one time, that's exactly what it is. It's just an incident that happens. If it starts to happen more than one time, and bad things happen as a consequence of that, it's a pattern.
Detectives discovered that in this most recent fire, Scott took some highly suspicious precautions before the flames started.
He had loaded up his minivan with all their important possessions. They had clothes in there, CDs in there, but they also had things like photographs and very old cookbooks and things that had some sentimental value that they wouldn't want to have burn up in a fire.
All the evidence appeared to indicate that Scott set his own house on fire. But why?
It was determined that he set the fire to his home because he was well over $200,000 in debt, and he was hoping to get some type of insurance money by burning down his house.
In fact, one of the key pieces of evidence against Scott was something he said to his wife while making a 911 call about the fire.
911, where's your emergency? There was fire. Oh, you did?
Yeah.
That's the FD units responding. They're present. They heard some type of explosion.
He had moved his favorite possessions out of the house, but he forgot one, the family pet, a ferret named Tito.
It's totally not something that individuals would talk about typically when your house is burning down.
Yeah, I'll get that.
This was planned out. Somebody was supposed to get this ferret out of the house, and that person failed to do their job and left the ferret behind. And of course, it met its demise in that fire.
Investigators prepared to arrest Scott Burke for arson, but they couldn't let go of Scott's seemingly offhand comment about his first wife Margaret's long ago suicide, made for no apparent reason as his house burned to the ground.
I think there were certainly a lot of family members that believed all along that Scott did it.
You knew deep down inside she didn't kill herself, but you had to resign yourself to the fact that, this is what was ruled, so that's how it sits.
And it sat that way for more than 20 years. But now, investigators were taking a fresh look at the case. Could it be possible that, after all this time, they would finally discover how Margaret Burke really died?
There were still things to be solved here. There's still things needed to be done. We needed justice for Margaret.
In September of 2011, investigators got a court order to exhume Margaret Burke's body.
You just never know how things are going to turn out when someone has been deceased for almost 30 years.
There was so much water in the actual vault where the casket was. And then once we got the casket back to the medical examiner's office, we were able to open the casket. They actually had to get some tools and come in and break open the casket. And then there was a lot of water inside the casket.
But to the amazement of nearly everyone, the body was in remarkably good condition.
The chemicals in the embalming fluids will preserve you. You may have some like mold or mildew, but essentially the body remains, intact. And the embalming fluid will delay the decomposition. I'm not saying you're not getting decomposed, but they will delay the decomposition.
We were able to examine all organs that were not really properly looked at during the first autopsy. So we were able to gather evidence in this case.
While a second autopsy was conducted, Scott Burke was arrested on the arson charge. Detectives took the occasion to update him about the investigation into his first wife's death.
Detective Mifflin tells him, "Oh, by the way, Scott, we got a court order to exhume your first wife's body." And it's almost like a valve opened and drained all the color out of his face. And his air of arrogance was totally gone. It was that moment where he knew that I screwed up.
They're inseparable. These are besties. It's a very thin line between love and hate. Whatever happened here was horrific.
Vengeance, Killer Besties, now available on demand.
The question before investigators was whether they could prove Scott Burke staged the suicide of his first wife, Margaret. Scott claimed she'd hanged herself by anchoring a rope on a stair banister and jumping from a second floor. Investigators had photographs from Margaret's first autopsy, conducted way back in 1985, and now they had her body, exhumed in 2011. So, how did she die? Forensic pathologist Dr. Manisha Pandey is a consultant to this program.
In a hanging, usually what I would look for is a ligature to see, how the neck is, what kind of ligature has been used. What is a ligature? It's anything which is used to compress your neck.
A hanging will usually create a V mark at the back of the neck because the pressure is coming from below, from the victim's weight.
It goes upwards, angles up behind the ears, and then comes up to the back of the head in a V-shaped fashion. So it will come out like this because the noose is at that V.
But if someone is strangled,
It will be similar to all the, whatever ligature has been used.
Scott claimed that when he found Margaret's body, the first thing he did was cut the rope from around her neck. But amazingly, after her exhumation, and despite all that time underground, Margaret's skin told an entirely different story.
Because the skin is elastic, so it tends to pull the marks. You're not living. You're not healing. So if there's no healing, the mark will remain permanently.
The surfaces of most ropes are rough, a little grainy, but the marks on Margaret's neck were smooth, leading to speculation that a belt might have been used. To test this theory, detectives set up a simulation with a rope, a belt, and clay to play the part of human skin.
What we did was we put the clay under the cans, and then we took the belts, and then we put it over the clay and started squeezing the belt. So it's like as if you were going to strangle somebody using a perfect indentation.
The stitching from the belt made the same impression on the clay that we saw on Margaret's neck. And our aha moment was that he used a belt to strangle her.
And now detectives got an explanation for the strange, previously unexplained mark across Margaret's chest. This was most likely from a rope. Margaret, just days from giving birth, weighed a lot more than Scott. The evidence showed that to get Margaret in position to stage the suicide, Scott wrapped a rope around her to drag her to the right spot.
That would be the only explanation of why that mark would have been on her chest.
In January of 2014, Scott Burke was charged with felony murder and tampering with evidence. But the role of science in this case was far from over. Before the trial, prosecutors took a highly unusual step. They teamed with investigators to recreate and videotape the alleged suicide scene in the actual apartment where it happened. Amazingly, the banister that Scott claimed Margaret hanged herself from was still in place.
Had been made in 30 years to those banisters. They were the original banisters.
The banisters were made of soft pine wood. Prosecutors used a mannequin of Margaret's height and weight. The mannequin was thrown from the second floor, simulating Margaret jumping to her death. This time, the rope made a deep indentation in the soft pine wood.
What was discovered is that if a rope was used and somebody who weighed a couple hundred pounds and was hanging off that banister, it would cause an indentation in the wood of the banister.
Prior to this simulation, there were no marks, no indentations on any of the banisters, disproving Scott Perk's story of suicide.
52-year-old Scott Perk is standing trial on charges that he killed Margaret Ann Perk.
In November of 2015, Scott Perk was found guilty of Margaret's murder and tampering with evidence. He won't be eligible for parole until he's 87 years old.
When the jury came back with their conviction, it was just like what a send-off gift for my retirement.
I don't know if there's anybody that can ever figure him out. No matter how much time they have to study him.
Perhaps the oddest part of a very odd case is that
You're watching A-Time on Demand.
up next, a police officer's life is forever changed by a young woman's murder.
It's as if you live that scene over and over and over again.
There's evidence found with the victim, but no technology to properly test it. The case stalls for nearly 2 decades until a new device designed for food safety finally exposes a killer.
This is kind of like the nail in the coffin.
It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my law enforcement career.
About 2 weeks before Christmas in 1995, Todd Bonnet, a patrolman in Utah's Wasatch County Sheriff's Office, got the kind of call all policemen dread. A farmer found a corpse next to a river on his property.
This was the body found nude. You knew deep down in the back of your mind that this was going to be a different type of a case.
The victim, a female in her late teens, perhaps her early 20s, had been beaten to death and left along an isolated stretch of the Provo River. No conventional murder weapon was found at the scene, but it didn't take long to figure out what had been used to kill this young woman. 6 bloody rocks were found near the body.
The rocks ranged in different sizes. We did come across one, I don't want to say it was a small rock, but it was small enough that you could grab hold of it with your hand, and it appeared to have a handprint or a fingerprint.
The rocks told detectives straight away that they were dealing with what's known as a crime of opportunity.
For whatever reason, whatever motivated that, he grabbed the nearest thing that he thought he could kill someone with and just beat her for a considerable period of time until she died.
Some rocks were as large as a small microwave that you might see on someone's kitchen counter. Very heavy, 50 to 70 pounds at least. Were used, very angry, very brutal.
The victim's clothes were gone. There was no identification. And besides the rocks, there were a few clues at the scene. The crime looked to be sexually motivated, but the autopsy threw that into question.
There was not evidence of a sexual assault. There was evidence of a sexual encounter.
That encounter may have been consensual. DNA was recovered from the victim's rape kit, but this was 1995. Only 8 years since DNA was first used to convict someone. Most states, including Utah, were years away from using DNA.
There was a technology that exists in the world that is either too expensive or too limited to be used by law enforcement on a day-to-day basis.
Was it possible the victim knew her killer? A strange clue found not far from the body made it seem likely.
The only other thing that was found at the scene was a pair of black socks. And they were about maybe 10 feet away from her body, and they were just placed neatly on a rock.
These socks weren't haphazardly discarded. They were folded so neatly that someone, either the killer or his victim, had taken time to do this. Why? No one knew.
It was just strange.
Despite the absence of identification, the victim had some distinctive tattoos. Images were released to local media. Almost immediately, two men, a Salt Lake City cab driver and the victim's boyfriend, called police.
He identified her as Tracy Marie Veslanovich, and that Tracy was his girlfriend, and that they had moved from Spokane, Washington about 5 to 6 months prior to that to Salt Lake City.
Top Honor placed a call to deliver the grim news to the victim's stepfather in Washington State. And when he did, this already strange case got even stranger. Tracy's stepfather said she couldn't be dead because he had just seen her.
He told me that Tracy Veslanovich lived a couple of doors down from him, and he went to check to make sure that she was there. I waited on the phone while he was checking and come back and said, "You have the wrong person." What the hell was going on?
They're inseparable. These are besties. It's a very thin line between love and hate. Whatever happened here was horrific.
Vengeance, killer besties. Now we will demand.
When a 17-year-old woman was found naked and beaten beyond recognition, local detectives were determined to fight for a victim who, evidence showed, had clearly tried to fight for herself.
She put up one heck of a struggle, blocked a lot of blows with her fingers, the way that the hide had been ripped off of each one of her fingers. She struggled all the way through it.
Her boyfriend and a local cab driver identified the victim as a young woman named Tracy Veslanovich, but Tracy's stepfather, who lived 700 miles away in Washington State, told Utah police their victim could not be Tracy Veslanovich.
When Mr. Veslanovich told me that his daughter, Tracy, was in Spokane, I mean, it's just like, oh my gosh, what's going on here?
The answer soon became apparent. The victim in Utah was using a false name, the name of her younger sister, Tracy. The victim's real name was Crystal Veslanovich, and she was a young woman with a troubled past.
Crystal was a prostitute. Crystal would use the street name Baby Tracy or Tracy, and we believe that she would do that to try and throw off police if she was arrested.
Crystal's boyfriend, Chris, was her pimp. The two had been living and working together for years, and they recently moved to Salt Lake City.
Crystal was the breadwinner in their relationship.
Karen Mathis, herself a former prostitute, worked the same streets as Crystal.
We didn't care about ourselves. How can you? We didn't know any better. I didn't know any better. Why Crystal came at such an early age, she's had something happen to her in her past. This is not something that we wake up one day and say, we want to go do this.
When detectives learned that Crystal turned to prostitution because she had no other way to support herself, the case they were determined to solve became deeply personal.
I could not comprehend having one of my own daughters going through this. You're not supposed to take things personal, but I don't know how you don't take it personal one way or another.
Crystal and Chris didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have a car. They stayed in a seedy motel in downtown Salt Lake City, and Crystal worked her trade in a very small area of town.
She would never leave a 7-block radius. That was just her working area.
The raised questions for detectives. If Crystal only traveled on foot, how did her body end up nearly 50 miles away from downtown Salt Lake City?
First thoughts going through the investigator's mind that maybe she was kidnapped and brought up here, or maybe she went along willingly. Maybe this individual promised her money, more money, maybe promised her drugs or something else to get her to go this far away from Salt Lake.
Since Crystal's boyfriend Chris didn't have access to a car, police eliminated him as a suspect. Now police question the cab driver, who also identified Crystal. His name was Clarence Stonewalker, and he was one of Crystal's customers.
Clarence Stonewalker stated that he knew this young lady, that her name was Tracy.
Perhaps
But why are he doing that?
perhaps her early 20s. Had been beaten to death and left alone in
Oh, let's do this on purpose.
isolated stretch.
Let's do this on purpose. Why?
Post office. Not the kind of call. All policemen dread. A farmer found a corpse next to a river on his property.
This was a body found nude. You knew deep down in the back of your mind that this was done.
With the camera off.
Up next, she had everything to live for.
She was really looking forward to having a baby meal.
So, her death raises more questions than answers.
It was pretty obvious that something was right here.
Years pass. Then, someone reveals a clue about the victim.
Why are you telling us?
Can a dead woman buried for almost a generation solve the mystery of
How she really died? Because how solve the mystery? How you did it?
They're watching
It's alright, I'm going to man, boy. My tongue is how she really died. She had everything. On how she really dies.
She had everything to live for.
She was really looking forward. Pretty obvious that something was right here.
Years
Yeah.
pass. Then, someone reveals a clue. Narration solve the mystery of how she really died.
What in the world?
They've been married just a little over 3 years.
What in the world?
The young couple and many of their
No, that's somewhere near here
Scott
somewhere.
worked as a security guard. 24-year-old
Margaret had written to her grandparents, letting them know that everything was really well with her, everything was fine, she was happy, looking forward to the birth of their first child.
I feel great and full of energy. Just thank you, and so is Scott.
Not me, of course. I'm not having no child, bro. I ain't panicking.
Margaret's family and friends were relieved by her newfound optimism. She hadn't always been so full of hope.
There was one incident in Margaret's past where, she was upset about something and she had threatened to harm herself by using a cord from a mini blind in one of the rooms of the house.
It's more or less a feeble attempt because, it's really not going to happen. You don't really want to do it.
The family was convinced that any possibility on March 18th, shortly before Margaret
And he observed that his wife had somehow tied a rope from the banister on the second floor and had hung herself.
Margaret died a short time later and took a pound in all red.
First thought was, why would she do this close? She's within like 2 weeks of having the baby, so.
Seemed so impulsive, especially with the baby on the way. Even first responders and Akron police were suspicious.
28-year-old.
The detectives really thought there was more to it. The EMTs thought there was more to it.
No one had answers. Not Scott, not the family, not Margaret's friend.
He's saying something there. How she really time? Yo, yes, my love.
I heard of sifting through jobs that don't feel like the right fit.
You know what I mean, or when you do the yeah. I feel right for it. And that is we got. Got me, got me good. Shit, I got no love. Not my main channel. Then I'm still live. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm still live. What I live? I'm live on my computer. That's Mr. Box, right? School number. Bam, bam, bam. What's going on? We again at you Video game YT, video game YD. Video game Y2. I never show up. Edit it now. No love. Get off me, on the back of you, one from the same about. Myself. Logical, something I'm tactical, something up and logical. Don't give me the Making on the top of it up, and we're gonna make it. For the consequence, for the consequence. There's no world, you wanna make shit. I don't know, I never stood up, I don't make shit. I got no love with the greatness. They wanna play the I wanna show up, niggas take it. I never show up, I don't make shit. I got no love with the fakeness. They wanna play dumb, they wanna hate this. I wanna show up, baby. I got no love. W fam, we need to love with the fakeness. Hey, that hate this. Show Hello, send the message. One day, not what? No love. No love. No hate this. No love. Yeah. With the fakeness, hate this. No love with the fakeness. Wanna hate us, wanna hate us, no love with the fakeness. Let me get the grant, let me take you away. We ain't that all we just hate that. DBS is an artist. No, I don't take shit. This is the garden area. A great one day.